So let's talk about how you can minimize cortisol and aging in the gym because at the end of the day, gym selling is still always going to be one of the most accessible and powerful softmaxes that you have. But we want to do so whilst minimizing all of the negative health outcomes of gym selling. So let's get started. Firstly, the best thing you can do, the best decision you can do when it comes to gym selling in general is to decrease or just skip your leg training completely, right? Because firstly, leg training, it's really not going to benefit your physique much at all. In fact, in many cases, it can actually really be a net negative for your physique. Because firstly, you have to factor in sexual dimorphism, right? Because male sexual dimorphism is having more mass on our upper body compared to our lower body, whereas female sexual dimorphism involves having more mass proportionally on their lower body compared to their upper body. So when you're creating your training split, it doesn't make sense for you to have a even split of upper body to lower body volume like in an upper lower split, because you should be prioritizing your upper body more to create this, to be in line with your male sexual dimorphism, to create this hyper masculine type of physique. Whereas if you do something like this where you focus too much on your legs, it'll actually really mess up your physique because it'll just make your whole lower body look wider and in turn make your upper body look more narrow, like an upside down triangle, right? That's the case with Will Tennyson. And that's also why powerlifting in general is just not a very good training style for an aesthetic physique, because powerlifting, you're literally focusing 2/3 of your competition exercises on the lower body, that being the squat and deadlift. So firstly, right, when it comes to maximizing your aesthetics, as long as you don't have skinny legs, legs that look skinny when you're in shorts, and as long as you don't have a visibly flat butt, then really you're pretty much at your maximum leg aesthetics, right? Getting an extra few pounds of muscle on your quads, getting bigger hamstrings, it's really not going to benefit your physique as nearly as much. And in particular, right, like I said, having big quads is actually that can be a net negative for your physique because it'll just make your whole lower body look wider and mess up your proportions. So that's why, firstly, it's not even good for your physique. Next thing is leg compounds, right? Particularly like the squat and also the deadlift. They're pretty much the most stressful exercises in the gym, right? And that's the same reason why everyone hates them, right? Literally, no one likes doing squats because it is most stressful and it'll spike your cortisol the most. Whereas compared to upper body exercises, something like bench press, right? Bench press is still kind of a stressful exercise. Well, all exercises are stressful. However, people actually like the bench press. A lot of people actually really enjoy the bench press because compared to something like the squat, which uses a bunch of muscle mass and is really stressful on your body, the bench press is so much less stressful that even though it is still stressful, people actually find it enjoyable. So not only will skipping legs stress your body less, it'll really just make your training more enjoyable as far as training can be enjoyable. And lastly, is the concept of putting on less total muscle. Because as you may know, when you put on too much muscle on your body, that will age you and that'll just be more stressful on your organs. For example, the heart, right? Because let's say your natural body weight is 160 pounds. That's your natural, untrained, healthiest body weight. And then by gym selling for, I don't know, let's say 6 to 8 years, you're able to put on 40 pounds of muscle, right, through training your whole body, including your legs. That means that now you went from 160 pounds, hundreds, forget that. You went from 160 pounds to 200 pounds. That's an extra 40 pounds of muscle that your heart has to pump blood to. That's an extra 40 pounds of muscle that your organs, all of your organs have to support. And that's an extra 40 pounds of mass that all of your joints have to carry. That's why a lot of people who went to the gym for a while and put on a lot of muscle, they walk funny, they can't walk properly, they have foot pain, they have joint pain, and they just feel terrible all around. Whereas if you skip or just really minimize your leg training, you're able to get all of the aesthetics benefits, mainly in your upper body, whilst minimizing the total amount of muscle that you have in your legs. So instead of adding an extra 40 pounds to your whole body, now you only added 25 pounds to your whole body, which means that it's again, much less stress on your hard organs and joints, and you still have all the important upper body muscles like, the biceps, shoulders, abs, lats. You have all the important upper body muscles that give you the most aesthetic and looks max benefits, right? If you want to put it that way. So in general, right, by decreasing and just skipping your training, you're gonna have a better physique, you're gonna have less stress and aging, and all of your workouts are gonna be more enjoyable as far as workouts can be enjoyable because you're just removing all of the most stressful exercises that everyone hates. So that's the first tip, right? Again, decrease or skip your leg training. And like I said earlier, right, that's why I think upper lower is not a very good training split because you're literally spending an even amount of volume on your upper body and lower body. So if you want a training split that is more upper body dominant, I'm going to give you 3 options right now. Firstly, this one's my favorite. It's the full body training split. And you can do this either 3 times a week or as low as 2 times a week, or you can do it every other day, which is 3.5 times a week. However, I think every other day, it's just not very practical for most people because you have to be able to train on literally any day of the week, including like Sundays or just any day of the week. So I think full body twice a week is the best way to train if you want to have minimum time in the gym and have minimum stress. Full body 3 times a week is going to get you really great gains while still only being in the gym 3 days a week. And the way you make it upper body focused is pretty simple, right? In your full body workouts, instead of treating it like a full body workout, just treat it like an upper body workout with 1 or 2 lower body exercises at the end. So you can start with 5 to 6 upper body exercises, then 2 lower body exercises. For example, you start with, let's say, pec deck, weighted pull-up, shoulder press, bicep curl, any kind of curl you want, T-bar row, right? You have all of your upper body exercises. And then for your lower body exercise, you can just do a leg curl or maybe some kind of leg extension or back extension. Just pick any 2 leg exercises that you want to do and that you want to train that day. But the focus is always on the upper body. Now, if you're interested in 4-day splits as an alternative to the upper-lower split, then the torso and limb split is a great option as well. The torso and limb split is basically an upper-lower, but you move your you move your arms to the start of your leg day. So torso day is just chest, shoulders, and back, right? So you can do your pressing exercises, you can do your back exercises, some lateral raises, and then on limbs day, you just start with your arms, so your biceps and triceps, and then you do whatever leg training that you want, right? Again, you don't have to do squats, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. If you only want to train, let's say, your hamstrings, and that's all you want to train for your legs, and you don't really care about getting any other muscle bigger, then your legs can literally just be 1 to 2 sets of hamstring curls, right? So if you don't want to get bigger legs, if you don't want to get bigger quads, you don't need to train quads. If you don't want to get bigger glutes, you don't need to train glutes, right? It's pretty simple. You can do like a little bit of volume to maintain it if you want though. Now the third split, which is relatively meta, right? It's pretty new, but I think it's actually really underrated and a really great split is the anterior posterior split. So again, it's kind of like the upper lower, but it's basically push pull legs, but you mix the legs in with the push and pull workout. So anterior day is just an upper body push workout, so you can train your chest, shoulders, and triceps, and then you do your quads, leg extensions, and adductors at the end. And posterior day is just an upper body pull workout, but then you do your glutes, so let's say a hip thrust or any kind of hip extension exercise, and then your hamstrings at the end, so any kind of leg curl. And with this split, what I like about it is that you can basically just train your legs only through isolation exercises. So you don't need to do any heavy deadlifts, you don't need to do any squats, because on anterior day, you're just doing leg extensions and the adductor machine. So another great option for an upper body focused training split if you still want to train a little bit of legs. And of course, you can just skip it completely, right? You can just do 3 upper body workouts a week, 2 upper body workouts a week, and just skip legs completely if you want. But these are the upper body focused splits that I would recommend to decrease or just skip your leg training. Personally, I use the 3 times a week full body. Next thing you can do to minimize cortisol in the gym is using more isolation exercises. And I kind of talked about it over here, right? Instead of doing heavy squats and deadlifts, we're just breaking it down into leg extensions and adductors, which are going to be way less stressful. And the first way that you should use isolation exercises is to minimize overlap, minimize muscle overlap between different exercises. So, for example, right, let's say on an upper body day or an anterior day or a torso day, right, whatever split you choose, you want to train your chest and your shoulders. So you have a few options, right? You can do a chest press, which will train the chest with a little bit of triceps and front delts as well. You have the shoulder press, which will train the front delts, side delts, and the triceps. And then you also have the isolation exercises like the pec deck and the lateral raise. And what you might do is you might start with the chest press for the chest, and then you go to the shoulder press for the shoulders, right? For the front and side delts. However, by doing that, you're doing two compound exercises, which are going to be the most stressful and hardest on your body, right? Because you're using more muscle, and compound exercises are generally, they feel harder. And again, that's going to be the best way to tell how stressful an exercise is just how hard it feels. If an exercise feels really hard, like a hack squat or just a squat, then that means it's going to be really stressful on your body. Whereas if an exercise feels kind of easy, even if you go to failure, so something like a lateral raise, then it's going to be way less stressful on your body. So instead of doing two compound exercises which have overlapping muscles, mainly the front delts and triceps, this is what you can do, right? On one workout, you can pair your chest press with a lateral raise. So instead of having all of this front delt and triceps overlap, you're doing the chest press for the chest whilst also training a bit of your front delts and triceps, and then you can do the lateral raise to cover for the side delts, which is what's missing. And on another workout, you can do the shoulder press, which will train the front delts, side delts, and triceps, and pair it with the pec deck. So again, you're minimizing muscle overlap. So instead of doing these two compounds, you're doing isolations whenever you can to fill in these muscle overlaps and not overlap any muscles in different exercises. Because what some people might do, and this is even crazier, is they'll do a chest press and then go to a pec deck, even though they literally train the same muscle and they literally have the same arm path, and it's pretty pointless. Same thing with doing a shoulder press and then a lateral raise, right? The shoulder press actually has really, really high side delt activation, especially if you use a pronated grip like this. So, right, first way is just avoiding overlap, right? Don't do squats and then leg extensions. Don't do chest press and then pec deck. Don't do shoulder press and then lateral raise. Pair them up in a way that you can use as many isolations as possible and minimize muscle overlap. Now, the second way that you should be using more isolation exercises is to decrease stability demands. And technically, these are still isolation exercises, but we're basically doing isolation exercises. We're just doing exercises in a way that minimizes contributions from other muscles. So for example, instead of doing a standing overhead press, which by doing that, you're using all of your core, all of your legs, all of your upper back muscles to stabilize, just do it seated. And you can do it with dumbbells, machines, whatever you want. So again, right, like I said earlier, the best way to tell how stressful an exercise is on your body is how hard the exercise feels. So when you do a standing overhead press, it feels way harder than a seated press because you're using all of these other muscles in your body to stabilize. Therefore, by doing a seated press, it's going to be less stressful and it's going to be more chill, if you want to put it that way. Same thing with like something like a standing barbell curl, where once you actually get heavy enough, you're going to start using your core, your legs, and everything else to stabilize, and it's going to feel harder because of it. Whereas if you do something like a lying curl, right, this is an extreme example, right? In actual practice, you probably do something like a seated curl, which is what I do as well. But just as an example, if you do something like a lying curl, you can push your biceps to the same level of muscular failure as the standing curl. However, it's going to feel a lot easier. It's going to feel a lot less tiring, and it's going to be a lot less stressful on your entire body as a whole because you're only using the muscle that you're training and you're not recruiting all of these other random muscles to train your biceps. So second thing you can do is just find ways to have less stability demands. So again, if you can do it seated and don't do it standing. And you might be thinking, oh, what about abs? These activate my abs. If you want abs, just train it separately, right? Do cable crunches, do a weighted sit-up, just train it separately. You don't have to do all of this because with these exercises, you're not even training your abs that effectively in the first place. You're just getting a low level of stimulus while still stressing your whole body in general. So that's the second way, is to have less stability demands and make the exercises feel easier. And the third way, which we kind of covered over here, is simply to break a hard exercise down into easier ones. So instead of doing a squat, which again, it is probably the most stressful exercise you can do in the gym, maybe next to the deadlift, and that's why everyone hates doing squats, because it's stressful and your body doesn't want to do it. Instead of doing squats, you can, if you still want to train legs, that is, you can break it down into isolation exercises that feel way easier. So something like a leg extensions and then a hip adductor machine. And by the way, a great trick you can use is doing exercises with one limb at a time. So single leg extensions, because by doing that, you're only, you're training less muscle mass at the same time. See, the reason why squats are such a shitty exercise, as in they stress your body so much, is because you're using a lot of total muscle mass at the same time. That's why it feels so stressful. So by that same logic, you can break an exercise down into one side at a time. You're using less total muscle at a time, and it's going to feel easier and therefore be less stressful. Because again, how stressful an exercise is just can be shown by how hard it feels to do it. So break this super hard, like compared to doing one set of squats to failure, doing one set of leg extension and then one set of hip adductors is just way easier and way less stressful. Now, like I mentioned, and there is one training split that is ideal if you want to do as many isolations as possible, and that is the anterior posterior split. In fact, the anterior posterior split is the most practical training split, where you can literally only do isolation exercises and still train your entire body. So I'll just give you a quick example of what that might look like, right? Because remember, for anterior day, it's just an upper body push workout with leg extensions and adductors. So it might be pec deck, lateral raise, front raise, and press down. You're training your entire push muscles just by doing that, right? Your chest, your side delts, your front delts with a little bit of upper pec, and your entire triceps. Same thing with posterior, right? You can do the Keenan flap to isolate your lats or any kind of pullover you want, Kelso shrug for your traps, rear delt fly for rear delts, and then any kind of curl that you want. And then for legs, you can do a leg curl and something like a hip thrust or a glute bridge, which are pretty much the same thing anyways for your glutes, right? You can literally train your entire body with 6 exercises per workout and only doing isolation exercises. So that's why I think anterior posterior is actually a really underrated training split that you can use. Now, last thing that you can do to minimize cortisol in the gym is to lower your sets and reps, to lower your training volume in general, right? Because the thing is, you can get most of the gains that you would get from 4 to 5 sets in only 2 sets. And I'll show you an interesting study over here, right? These are the total weekly sets to failure that the people in the experiment did. And in this example, right, 3 sets just means that they only did 1 set 3 times a week. And this is the amount of gains that they got. Whereas if you double the volume, right, you go from doing, so let's say you train 3 times a week and then you only do 1 set, this is the amount of gains that you get. If you were to double your training volume and go from 3 sets to 6 sets over here, you're only gaining a tiny amount of extra gains, whereas you're literally doubling the amount of training that you do, doubling your training time, doubling the amount of stress that you put on your body just for a little bit more gains. And then if you were to triple your volume, around 9 over here, again, right, you're only gaining a little bit of extra gains, whereas most of your gains would actually come from doing the first 1 to 2 sets in an exercise. So because of that, you might as well just do only 1 to 2 sets instead of going all the way to 4 to 5, because you're getting most of the gains without doubling your stress. Whereas if you want to maximize your gains, you're going to have to add in so much extra stress on your body and so much extra training that it's really not worth it at that point, right? Because we're not trying to be gym cells to maximize muscle gains for in trade-off of our health. We're just trying to get as much results as possible whilst minimizing all of the negative health outcomes of working out. So firstly, just by doing 1 to 2 sets, you're going to get most of the results, and you don't have to go all the way to 4 to 5 sets. And secondly, stick to lower reps, because lower reps are actually going to be less stressful and easier to recover from compared to 12 plus reps or even 15 plus reps in a given set. Because firstly, you can build muscle anywhere from 5 to 30 reps. And the reason for that is you have to understand the stimulating reps model. So basically, the idea is, right, the simplified idea of the stimulating reps model is that the last 5 reps to failure are the ones that actually stimulate growth. So you can see if you were to do a 5 rep max for 5 reps, then all 5 reps are going to be stimulating reps that will grow muscle. Whereas if you do a 6 rep max and do 6 reps to failure, then the first rep isn't actually going to do anything, and it's only the last 5 reps. Same thing where if you do 15 reps, right? If you do 15 reps to failure, the first 10 reps aren't going to stimulate growth at all. It is only the last 5 reps that will stimulate growth. But however, all these past 10 reps, they're still going to cause muscle damage, and they're still going to cause stress on your body and increase your cortisol without causing growth. So basically, you want to stick to lower rep ranges 4 to 8, where you're basically minimizing the amount of useless reps and maximizing the amount of stimulating reps that you have in a given set. And just imagine it this way, right? Put it this way. If you were to do 15 reps to failure, you're going to end up doing 5 really hard reps. The last 5 reps are going to be really, really hard and just really difficult. Whereas if you only do 8 reps to failure, again, you're still getting the same amount of stimulus, same amount of stimulating reps, but it's only the last 3 reps that are going to be really, really hard. And you can also extrapolate this, right? If you were to do 100 reps to failure, it's going to be way harder than doing 8 reps to failure, because imagine 100 reps to failure, basically the last 40 reps are all going to be super hard and super brutal, and you're going to break down your muscles and have a bunch of lactic acid in your muscles. Whereas if you only do 8 reps, you're literally getting a similar amount of gains, well, probably better gains, without all that stress. It's the same reason why marathons suck so much. So basically, lower reps are actually going to be easier to train for training, and they're also going to be less stressful on your body because you have less muscle damage, less muscle breakdown, less lactic acid accumulation, and you're just going to be a lot easier to recover from in general. So, right, lower your sets to only 1 to 2 sets, and lower your reps to as low as 4 to 8 reps, and don't go do these super high rep sets because they're actually worse. And it's basically like doing marathons, right? Same reason why marathons are so stressful. And lastly is just don't train to failure, right? Because failure is super stressful. You're gonna spike your cortisol like crazy. And like we talked about earlier, right? It is the last 5 reps that stimulate growth. So when you train to failure, you're not actually gonna get more gains. If you train to failure, it's gonna be the same as leaving 0 reps in reserve, because you both end up doing the last 5 reps that you have and getting your last 5 stimulating reps. However, by going to failure, you are just stressing the fuck out of your nervous system and making it way harder to recover from. So either go 0 reps in reserve, where you know that the next rep is going to fail, so you just don't try the rep that's going to fail, or you can even go 1 rep in reserve. So let's say you choose a weight that you can do a 5 rep max with, but then you only do 4 reps, right? So you're keeping 1 rep in reserve, but you're still getting 4 stimulating reps, but it's just, again, way less stressful, and you're training less hard, which again is what we want, because we want to be able to make gains without training extremely hard, right? Minimizing stress, minimizing cortisol. And lastly, if you found that helpful, you can go check out the BP Fitness System, link in the description, where I talk about how to use gym selling as the best softmax that you have, some frame frauding strategies, height frauding strategies, illusion strategies, how to assess your bone structure and develop your physique based off of that, how to build muscle without aging and stressing yourself, how to use carbs to maximize motor unit recruitment, all of that stuff, as well as just some science-based lifting stuff, so that once you identify your bone structure and you know how to build your ideal physique, you can then get there as fast as possible with the most meta, up-to-date, modern, science-based lifting. And there's also the Discord community as well. So you can, once you join, you can get added to the private Discord community where you have forums, text channels, voice channels, and all of that. And this is just kind of what it looks like when you're inside, what the videos look like. Yeah, so that's it. You can go check that out if you're interested, and I'll see you in the next video.